Hi guys, welcome to our podcast FinTech की बात दिल से. Today here we have an episode of Gyan from the Pahalwan. Today we have our first industry expert with us, Mr. Vikram Pandya, who is the research head at Varanium Capital and also the FinTech director at SPJN School of Global Business. Vikram, can you tell us more about yourself and today's topic as well?
Sure, why not? So I have been in the industry for more than around 15 plus years now, and the idea is that in today's session is to understand security as a digital design thinking concept, because most of the times in fintech specifically, security comes as afterthought and not as a part of the design thinking itself. So in today's journey, we are going to look at how to think about security. Even if you are a customer, how do you need to look at your own security, and how can you then identify that your data is leaked in the market, right? And how can you then react on that? That's what we are going to do. I have created some talking points which I will cover.
Perfect. We're super excited to know more about this.
So let's look at data leakages which happens. We have seen in recent times so many data leakages that we have experienced, and there are typical multiple reasons behind any data leakages. First and foremost, that security includes people, processes, as well as infra. And when we talk about people and processes, sometimes people are the weakest link, as we know, right? And if you include scientifically, the data leakage can be bifurcated into internal sources or external sources. When you look at internal sources, you have ineffective IT policy, where you have the policy, but it is toothless. And because of that, nothing is happening, right? Second is you have intranet, which is not secure enough. And because of that, the data is getting leaked even through internet, where some node is there or some computer is there on the internet where the security is weak. But because of that, the entire internet is compromised and your data is leaking outside. At the end, you have file sharing. So most of the people today disallow file sharing, but there are multiple different ways and means file sharing can happen. We are going to look at a few of them today, but the idea here is that these are the major reasons, not only reasons, but major reasons which you can identify behind data leakages from internal sources. But most of the times what happens, even if you are having good IT policy, even if you have good internal controls, but what happens is that you don't know what kind of security you are building into your application and effectively on the cloud where you are putting your infrastructure. So that is what brings us to the next part, which is external sources. Now, first and foremost, application security, as you all know, your application is going to be a pathway for any communication in and out. So your server talking to your client and data exchange which happens through that is also part of the application security. So if at all something goes wrong, you need to understand that first and foremost, you need to check your application security and identify that, okay, there are certain logical issues or any security bugs or loopholes which you can identify. So as a company, you need to constantly understand that whatever change, even if you do small update, that small update can have implication with regards to the earlier development which you have done. And because of that, this entire development cycle that you typically look at, software development life cycle, as we say, you need to look at it in more agile manner, and that's where you have this agile life cycle and project management coming into the picture. But at the same point in time, you need to look at security by design. Again, I'm repeating, by design, not as afterthought. And you need to think about not as a patchwork as well, because the moment you realize that you are fixing this application and suddenly you realize that I need to change everything, including database design, including my application workflow, and suddenly you are starting from scratch. So your investment of time, effort, money is gone. So application security, first and foremost, very critical. Within that, APIs play a major role today. So most of the people are not even aware what is API. So I will just touch upon that point. What is API really? So whenever you are talking about data exchange between two systems, so let's say a system A and system B is trying to communicate between each other. At that point in time, you need to look at APIs, because whenever we are talking about standardization in the data, understanding that this data set, which is in one application using different architecture, different construct, how can I share this in a common standardized manner? That is where RESTful APIs and other APIs come into picture. You are sharing data in a standardized construct, and that data exchange is enabled by the API. So very simple layman's language, APIs are pipelines between two servers. Now this data servers, which we are talking about, data exchange between the server rather, that we are talking about, this can be on the same network or this can be on internet. When it is on internet, we call this as web services. And whenever we are talking about on the same premises, etc., it is still API but not web services.
Just to give a bit more holistic view, let's take a step back and let's dumb this down a bit. If you're looking at it from a startup founder's perspective, who is purely a business guy, and he hires a tech team, so how do you think he should approach the security concern? Because considering the fact that a fintech founder is essentially in a hurry to get their product out, because that is when he can show some pilot traction and he'll get the first seed investors in. So how should he look at security at that point of time, and how does this plug in at that point?
Absolutely right. So that's why I mentioned that whenever you are talking about development cost, right? Development cost, you normally raise fund and you plan for the development cost. So you have IT cost, marketing cost, etc. I request them to in fact identify security costs separately as well, rather than as a part of IT cost, because people just think about, okay, IT cost will include everything, but end of the day they don't include security as a part of IT, and they fail because of that. So number one, you need to identify a budget for security beforehand. And as I mentioned, look, whenever you are developing anything, either in-house or outside, right? Whether you outsource that development or whether you develop in-house, you will go through some planning process. At that point in time, involve some security expert. Either if you are having fund, go ahead and hire some big five who are doing this kind of audit, security audit, and bring them. Or even if you don't have that much money, you can always hire security experts on consulting basis, and then you can ask them, okay, this is what I'm planning. What kind of security I need to look at? Not only from the infra side, but also from the let's say application perspective, from the API perspective, from the customer perspective, because my application is going to be there in unknown environment. I don't know. Sometimes because of that, some data leakage might happen. Who knows, right? So we need to be asking this kind of question. We need to ask them to security experts before we even start development. So that's when I mentioned that we need to think of security as a planning process, as a design process, rather than afterthought.
Got it. So one more thing, just a second. So one more thing, when you talk about these fintech applications, right, and they have essentially today fintechs are in the ecosystem play wherein you plug in a KYC API, you plug in an underwriting API into your app and you build it. So at that point, how important does it become to ascertain the kind of security concerns that comes with plugging in third-party APIs into your application and transfer of sensitive data through that?
Very good question. So here there are two parts to that. One part, when we look at whether you are, I will give you one simple example and then it will be very clear to you, right? So let's assume I'm trying to implement OTP. Okay. So I'm looking at two-factor.in API, which is for OTP, for example. Now in this example, if I look at API documentation, you will see what kind of call I will need to make. So I'm very simply looking at as a layman without knowing anything. Let's say that I'm looking at this sending OTP, there is one code, and then you have sample response which will come once you send this, and that response will have this one-time key which you can then again call back, and then you can verify the OTP that is entered by the user. Now what you are doing here is that you are isolating, this is as a best practice, you are isolating response and again callback from the server. So not both the things are happening using the same key. But in this case, what you are doing, you are isolating OTP verification from the server side key verification. So this is the best practice, which I am saying that this is what you normally should follow. However, there are certain places where people don't do that. So, but if I were to just explain the other way around, rather than showing you, because then it will showcase the server itself, which I don't want to do. So if you look at this, in this scenario, what if rather than this, I were to share directly OTP? What will happen then? Think, if instead of this API was returning directly the OTP, what will happen? In that scenario, even user can see the response, by the way, because he can identify using network analysis, he can identify that, okay, this is the API call which is made and this is the OTP I'm receiving. And once you can get that OTP, then I can enter anybody's mobile. I can enter your mobile number, and still I will get OTP to my server, right? Or basically my client. And you will also receive OTP, but you will ignore it because you never originated that OTP. So you will just assume some error is there, right? So you will ignore that. On the other hand, somebody else is now able to get your OTP, and somebody else is able to register on your behalf. So this is the API security that should be very basic to your vendor as well. In case they are not developing like that, let's assume that worst case scenario, they don't have this kind of a security. They are directly giving you OTP. Then what you should do is that you should create this call from your server, which is not visible to your client. From your server, you are making that call, and server is receiving OTP. Now when client receives on mobile and client sends this OTP to server will compare this to number, not at the client place. If you are implementing this API directly at the client place, then the code is visible. I am simply giving you a simple example to identify. Everyone knows API that we use for OTP. And here the simplest example is that where the implementation is incorrect, and because of that, you are able to open this sort of attack, and anybody can register on anybody else's behalf.
So coming back to Shreyas's point where he mentioned about a founder being from the business side and taking care of the tech issues. So you just mentioned while you were speaking that it can either be outsourced or built in-house. So what is a suggested way of going, because many people kind of stumble out there itself and take a longer time for making a good decision. So your suggestions on it.
So first and foremost question you need to ask yourself is that, is the technology core to my business, or is it something which is just going to support my business? Right? Sometimes you call this in a fintech world, tech fin business versus fintech business. Right? So if it is more tech fin, then you know by nature that your technology is going to be your major IP. Your business model, whenever you are looking at the overall business model, technology plays major role there, right? In that scenario, you should not be outsourcing, because of a simple reason that IP creation which is happening, right? That is where you want to put your people, your intelligence in that, and then you need to make sure that IP is then your own IP. Even if you create outside, IP is going to be yours, but then you are somehow you are not being able to control that entire piece, right? Here, everything is within your company, and you are controlling almost everything. That is the first and foremost. Second, let's assume that you are just a startup, very simply you want to just get something going, POC or proof of work that you want to demonstrate to certain people. Again, it is a better idea to just get someone and get it done rather than hiring team for POC, because that investment may or may not materialize. You don't know. Tomorrow somebody may select your project or POC, and then you may want to hire people, rather than first investing into people and then realizing that, okay, that POC was failure. So that is another scenario. And that is where I think you need to think from the, not only from the business dynamics perspective, but also from the contextual perspective when you are looking at whether it is going to add immediate value or is it going to have some long-term value. What I was discussing very quickly, I will summarize that data leakages can happen through internal or external sources. We were discussing on the external part now, where application security is very critical, and as a part of that, API security comes as a part of that. And you may have seen so many areas and places where, because of insecure APIs, people are able to capture information. So very simple example can be that I can provide my mobile number, and using my mobile number I can receive my profile. Now if that is not authenticated, then I can enter anybody's mobile number by just random guess, and I can get anybody's information. So again, even that mobile number should not be direct input in your API. Right? Something which is known, something which you can just predict should not be part of your API input. And that's the reason another best practice is to, whenever you have some ID, which is numerical, something which you can predict, you need to have something called as UUID. So if I were to look at UUID, this is what it looks like. Whatever you want to create, you can just convert it into something like this. It is very random. You can't even come to know what it is. Creator will have that key on the server database, but nobody will know what exactly is this. And you can't even predict that way, right? What that number will mean in this. It is a one-way function again. So this is what you can do as a small check that I wanted to highlight. Another thing is that whenever you are creating API using third-party services, right? People can ask you that. So let's just ask that, okay, what if you are using third-party API? Okay, you need to look at the vendor reputation. That is first and foremost. But even if you are looking at someone who is very new in the market, you need to look at and compare with someone who is already there in the market since very long, right? So you can always do benchmarking, and that benchmarking will allow you to understand where do you stand in terms of both quality as well as security of the API. So just to give you a simple example, this is the Kindle ebook reader, and on the Kindle ebook reader, these are the books available. If I were to look at the network and understand what exactly is going on, whenever I click on something, right? So if I click on network, I pressed F12, I clicked on network just to look at what is going on. And if I click any book, so you can see that there are certain APIs being called. So let me click on something else. Yeah, so this got open. So if you look at, this is what it is calling behind the scenes, some APIs which are being called get file URL, so and so forth. So if I were to simply show it to people that, look, if you want to understand here how Amazon is utilizing security on application level, you can see, first of all, it is a GET query, but even if it is GET query, it is asking for multiple things. It is a signed GET query. If I were to just right click and open it in new tab, so just to show it to you, get file URL, open in new tab. The given request is not an ADP session request. Ensure proper device type configuration is set. What does it mean? First of all, they are binding request to application itself. So I can't just call this from anywhere else. It is signed request coming from their application itself. Only their application can request it. That is number one. Second thing is that whenever you are looking at such request, you will see that even if I were to identify certain things, looking at the response, that this is the Amazon data that I am getting on my side. And if I were to just copy paste this, just to show you what may happen. Okay. So this signed URL you can see, and this signed URL I'm going to copy paste. So this is the signed URL, the big URL which you can see here. And if I were to again copy paste this only, you may see what may happen. Look at this. So this is again fragment, which is encrypted fragment, which again you can't do much, because while this entire book, this way you can download. You can download this entire book, but you can't do much without the reader. And that reader will check whether you are authorized to read this or not, and whether it is still active. All those things reader will check. So all those things you need to look at. I'm just giving a very simplistic view. There are so many things you need to think about, but I'm just giving you simple example. Now, there are certain APIs which are protected, while there are certain APIs which are open. For instance, this API, if you were to look at, is open. This is the dictionary API. So if I were to read my book, if I were to go back and let's say I were to read my book and I am having some doubt, what do we mean by, let's assume my question is, let's identify mechanism. So I'm double clicking on mechanism. It is giving me the definition of mechanism, right? Now behind the scene, what is going on? This is the API which they are calling. And you can see mechanism. This is how the data comes, and that application is then reading this data and showing you that. Now this is by nature, they are keeping it public, while the other part was private. So you can see that the same application can have public and private component. Why they are keeping public? Because there might be certain applications which may want to use this public API to do certain querying. That's what the idea is. So with this, I hope that at least insecure APIs are clear, and how you can compare and benchmark security practices of the companies like Amazon, right? While again, nothing in this world is 100% secure, but at least you can benchmark. Somebody who has reached that level, you can benchmark whether you are even close to that or not. And when you look at coding side, the beautiful thing is that you have certain best practices over there as well. You have OWASP best practices available, there are automated testing tools available which you can go and then test it out. So again, I will not go into technical part here, but I'm just trying to tell people that there are tools available, there are best practices available which you can utilize, and then you can identify whatever is lacking in your security, and you can then upgrade or fill the loophole. Let's continue on the other side, where you have database security. This part I'm going to cover more in detail, given that most of the leakages are happening here. So database security, what happens normally here, some database admin guy is left. Now your IT practices says that immediately whenever somebody goes, their identity and access management system should be able to remove that ID from the database itself. However, most of the startups, believe me, are on, let's say, GoDaddy or some other server, and as a part of that, they are not able to create anything. So whenever you are able to look at this entire scenario and identify that, okay, this is where my data breach may happen, I can go there and identify that my ID is still there, and suddenly somebody else is able to then have access to that even after leaving the company. And that is where most of the data breaches happen. Old database or old ID is there, still there, and then you are able to then access to that ID. Last but not the least is misconfigured S3 bucket or any storage bucket. What happens here is that you have stored multiple data set, and that data set, how bucket works, right? Bucket is like a folder. Think as a folder in your drive. Now you are putting certain things. Certain things are private, so you will not be sharing it. Certain things are public, so you may want to share it. But whenever you are trying to do that, sometimes it may happen that you have not configured your S3 bucket properly, and because of that, somebody else who is not as a part of your company can add themselves and then can get the data. So the entire security piece of that depends on the AWS best practices guide, and for that AWS has given the guide, so you need to follow that guide.
From an S3 bucket point of view, right? So what exactly is the exact use case? I mean, does it come in a day-to-day storage usage, or is it more from an archiving point of view? And if it's from an archiving point of view as well, how exactly does it sit with the fintech industries, and is it widely used, or are there other mechanisms that are a lot more safer and easier to use?
Okay, good question. I will tell you that there are multiple ways you can use S3 bucket. First and foremost, S3 bucket by nature is for storing data which is somewhat live in nature, and you may want to access it. If you don't want to access some data and you want to archive that data, then you need to use something as a Glacier storage. So S3 also has Glacier storage. The design of that storage is such that it is very cheap to store the data, but then there is a cost to retrieve the data as and when you want it. So whatever you don't want immediately, or you may want it hardly or rarely in future, you need to store that in Glacier. Most of the times what happens, people are just lazy, or they are saying that, okay, I may require that back again. So they will store that everything into S3 bucket. As a security best practices, you need to divide your data. There should not be any single point of failure. So you may want to divide your bucket also. And you may want to create multiple buckets. Like 1 year data might be in one bucket, who knows. So even if something goes wrong, at least only one bucket is compromised, everything else is secure. So it is always better to divide and conquer in security. Nowhere you need to have single point of failure. In recent examples, you may have seen that only one bucket was used and then the entire thing is available in the market. Just think about terabytes of data sitting there and people are just able to download that. So that is the issue. If you have created multiple such buckets, it will create so much hindrance for that user or a hacker that that person may not be able to even get that entire data. And sometimes it is even difficult for you to screw up everywhere. You may screw up in one or two places, but you can't screw up everywhere. So that is the reason that you need to then isolate and create separate folders or separate buckets, as we call it, if possible. And most of the times you can store in Glacier. All the archival of data you can do in Glacier.
Got it. So looking at this from an early stage startup or a mid-stage startup perspective that has probably raised a pre-series A kind of a thing, does creating multiple buckets, multiple S3 buckets for data storage essentially increase their AWS cost multifold, or how does that work?
That cost will not increase dramatically, there will be some cost, but it will not be that dramatic cost. It is just that it will require more maintenance, because in case you want to then refer to that, you need to have a proper mechanism of identifying that this data set is in this bucket, so and so forth. So that is the only discipline I would say that you need to maintain, that you know what data is where. And of course, if you are smart enough, you can have algorithms to identify and fetch the data. So that fetching of the data can always be automated. So the incremental cost is not much.
Got it. So at this point of time, the only thing that is restricting any evolved startup from using multiple buckets is probably the fact that either the data security
ease of use. It is ease of use, Frank.
Ease of use.
Ease of use. Once you have set up one thing, you can just rely on that. I don't need to touch that again and again.
Okay. Moving on.
Okay. Now let's come to the next part, where customer side we need to look at. If you are a customer and when you are dealing with startup, what kind of things you need to look at, right, before even you start? So first and foremost, preventive, and then you have cure or post facto steps that you can do once your data is already there in the darknet or some hacker forum. How do you prevent it? Right? First and foremost, you need to look at data security as a part of their privacy policy and terms of service. Whatever website you open, let's assume that I want to open Paytm website. So the first and foremost, you need to understand, while nobody will read, frankly, first and foremost, you need to look at as a customer is that not everything, but if you were to look at privacy policy. So let's look at terms of service. Terms and condition, you can see here. And as a part of that, you can see they have so many entities available that everything will be different. I have taken very complicated example, but just to show you what you can look at. So these are the services that they are providing you, communication policies, so and so forth. And you can look at the data part. Look. So ownership, property rights, modification, dispute, governing law, all these things you can see is on the covering their side. But whenever you look at on the other side, like digital services, what are these digital services? You can also look at some of the other part, data. Look at this data. So when you go through this, and you will understand that this is how your data is handled. Fortunately, in future, you may not need to go through this entire thing. Why? Because in future, similar to GDPR in India, you will have data protection bill, which will become act very soon. And that act will tell you for what reason your data is acquired, who will be storing that data, for how long, for what purpose. All those things will be available to you as a part of your sign up. So it will make your life much more easier. Right now, you can see that this is how it is. And for 99% of people, it is impossible for them to go through. Right? And that is where the issue lies, frankly. So first and foremost, you need to look at whether they have robust security or not by just looking at their terms and conditions. Are they taking something on their own? Some conditional disclaimer is there, or is it something they are taking on their own, right? Security wise, they are taking it seriously or not. That is number one. Second thing, you need to look at whether the communication policy includes that. So again, that becomes part of communication policy. You will find it under communication. Somewhere it is there. You can see that. So communication policy will tell you more about what communication they will, you can see here, what communication they will share with you. Whether it will include also for breaches or not. This should be there. And unlike what happened recently, you should have a very clear communication policy in terms of data breach. And again, you can then identify whether they are serious enough or not. So this is something which is a basic hygiene check. Nothing much you can do as a customer. But what you can do after that is that you can identify, whenever you are talking about fintech specifically, you can identify that, okay, if I'm sharing my data, I need to look at if I'm sharing my Gmail data and you want to identify if somebody is misusing your data to sell it to someone else, right? For example. So what simply you can do, let's say your email ID is something like this. Let's say it is Vikram@gmail.com. Let's assume this is the Gmail ID. and you want to identify how they are able to then sell it ahead, right? You can identify that by just putting plus sign and then put, let's say I'm registering for Paytm. I'll write Vikram plus paytm@gmail.com when I register. So at that point in time, I will identify if some marketing mail comes from this email ID, I can identify for sure that this ID was leaked by this startup. And I can then take whatever action I want. But at least I will know. That is first and foremost. I may not check every day, but every quarter, every month, whatever is the frequency I'm comfortable with, I will just search using Vikram plus something, and it will give me all the emails which are there with plus sign and something else, and I can see who all are selling my data. That is in your hand. That is one thing. This may not work with every domain, or Gmail is one such service provider which allows you to do plus. So if you are using Gmail and there are multiple other providers, then you can do that. But it may not work with everyone. So you need to know from that perspective what will work, what will not work. But for Gmail, it works. Now let's look at very quickly on the other side what else you can do, right? So let's look at this PyCloud kind of a service where you can check your exposure. Very quickly, I will check Shreyas's exposure. What is the email ID?
shrejani@gmail.com.
Correct?
Yeah.
So let's look at how secure he is.
Fingers crossed.
I think I have not clicked it correctly. Or I have clicked and it is not reacting to my click. Maybe something is wrong.
I think it's over.
Yeah, it worked. It worked. Yes, 55 personal records exposed. Last exposed 2 days earlier. Wow.
Wow. That's news.
And you can in fact share, now you have received the email and you can see the entire data. What is that data that is available in the public domain? I am specifically not sharing my data because then why to do that? You can, if you want, you can share your data. That is another thing. So anyways, so people who are interested can go through this kind of a service. There are multiple services, but this is one of the best free service that you can have for one email ID. And you can even, as a startup founder, you can track your own company's domain. So you have 10 employee, 20 employee, doesn't matter. You can track the entire domain of your company, and then you can identify if there is some data breach happening on the darknet, some hacking forum that you are not aware of. All those things will get captured and you will come to know that yes, your data is there in the market.
Right.
So that is what you need to understand. So this is another area where most of the people may not know, which I am sharing, that you should be knowing that how to identify certain data which is as and when it is happening. Sometimes what happens is that most of the people who are not aware, and these breaches may get notified in the market after a week or so. So most of the times, if the data is really sensitive enough and people are just trying that out, your data may get exposed further. In that scenario, you may want to either close the service and restart that service, or change everything, including your exposed card numbers and whatever else it is. Right? So that is the best possible thing you can do. Because most of the times people will not act immediately. They will act after a certain point in time. That is also may happen. So overall, I have given you that idea that how you can even look at from that perspective. Now, another thing, most of the people don't create secure enough password. They use same password in multiple websites. Again, very wrong thing to do. I understand that it is impossible nowadays to remember so many passwords with so many services around here. You can use services like LastPass. So for example, I use LastPass to store my passwords, and I have more than 1,000 websites password, which I can not remember for sure. But what I can remember is one password which is so complicated enough, and I change it after, let's say, every 90 days. But it is so complicated that it will take eternity to even brute force that, right? So that is something you can do on your own, and then make sure that that security best practices are followed. So I hope that gave you some insights, and that covers prevention side. Now let's come to the post-facto step. Some of the factors which I mentioned is post-facto also, that you identify and you close your account, etc. But what else you can do also is that you can put complaint on the consumer network so that it is there for others to see in future that yes, the data got leaked with the proper evidence. By removing certain details, personal details, you can provide that proof, and it can be very useful for making sure that companies take this seriously. Unless and until enough people go in the public domain and expose this, nobody is bothered. If enough people do that, then the goodwill is at stake and people will be much more keen on providing security, and then they are going to give you better experience around security as well as the usage. So that is number one you need to think and remember. As a customer, we have power. We can go and responsibly, I'm not saying that you just do for the sake of doing it. If there is really a hack which is happening and your data is exposed, using such tools to identify that data is exposed, then you can post it on the social media, post it on some consumer forum, and demonstrate that you are serious about your data privacy. That will enable regulator to look at this issue. That will allow government to be aware about this issue as well. And then, of course, startup will be afraid of this, because suddenly, if your goodwill is gone, nobody will be able to then repair that goodwill easily. So that will be very critical. So now let me ask you a couple of questions to understand whether you have identified this correctly and understood this correctly. So let's assume that you have your trading account. Now in trading account, you have transaction password and your one account password. Now, why do you think there are two different passwords available in your trading account? One is your signing in password, and then you have a trading password.
So that even if someone signs in, they cannot trade off.
Correct. So it is called intent-based authentication. Intent-based authentication means what? So somebody is just trying to sign in. I can share that signing in password with my auditor as well, but they can't do anything. They can't transact. Nothing can be done. So that is a best practice. You need to think about that and always go for services which allows you intent-based password. Now, two-factor authentication everybody will have, right? There also you need to think about how well you are able to secure your two-factor authentication. It is best practice to use Google Authenticator kind of a service, or you can have a token, hardware token, and that you also connect with your service. That is possible. But think about how you are normally consuming your data or signing up in your website. If you are using your mobile phone, then of course you need to use your mobile phone for everything. But however, whenever you are signing in your mobile phone, then you are exposing yourself to a risk that when your mobile phone is gone, both of them are gone together. So that is one major thing. So always remember that it is always possible to lose your mobile phone and then lose everything together. So because of that, it is not good practice to keep everything in mobile. But if you really want to do that, then keep that under, there are certain password managers available which will protect the application. So you need to protect the application separately, so that whenever you or somebody else is entering, right, they will not know about the password. So they can't access that application at all. Even if they uninstall the other software, it doesn't matter. That entire application is locked. You can't do much. So first of all, you need to remove that application. For again, that you require a password. So all those things are today available, and the hardware level encryption today is possible. So please do that. So your data, even if your mobile is gone, your laptop is gone, hardware level encryption will allow you to make sure that nobody is able to look at your data. Now, last part before I complete, and then again, if you have a question, you can ask, is as a startup, there are not multiple things you can do because you have limited budget. You don't have even enough people with you. You may not be knowing that how to make it secure. But one thing you can surely do is that sometimes certain things you can plan out as a part of your own design thinking, digital design thinking. And if you don't know anything, you can hire a consultant and ask them whether this makes sense. And that is what I mentioned earlier, but why I'm reiterating this, because this question comes back again and again. What can I do? I don't have budget. So what happens typically, you keep certain ESOP percentage for such consultant in the beginning. And there are people in the market who are ready to work with ESOP. And you can do that. Why not? So there are innovative models available in the market, and you can utilize that model in order to ensure that your product is safe and secure and it is scalable also. Sometimes what happens, security is possible at a lower scale, but then you have not thought about scale. And suddenly when you scale up, that security layer is gone. It is no longer possible to make it secure. So you need to think about scale at the beginning itself, and then only think that, okay, whether this scale going forward, if I increase that to 10,000 customer, can I still scale my security layer with the same level? That's what you need to think.
This has been really great and really insightful session, Vikram. Thank you so much for your time. It was indeed a pleasure having you here.